Okay. Right, so in our lesson plan, we were looking at Javelin. So basically looking at our teaching, our learning objectives. They were quite basic, just getting to know the teaching points of a javelin throw, to apply the teaching points of javelin throw into practice using implemented equipment of choice, and then to evaluate your partners and peers' performance against the teaching points. In our teaching points to the right, as you can see, we kind of highlighted just the key aspects of what we thought were key to a javelin throw. Obviously, it's very technical, but we just wanted to get the key points down that we thought were necessary to provide the students within the class. Looking at our success criteria, we just had like a bronze, silver, gold. So bronze, state 2 key technical points, silver, explain the importance of these key technical points, and gold, evaluate your partner's technique and provide feedback on their strengths and improvements. So that was kind of to be measured throughout the lesson. So just as a starter, in an ideal world, we would use mini iPads, and we'd provide them with a video, and we'd get them into small groups, and each group of 5 had an iPad, allowing them to watch the video. When they watched the video, they were then to notate down different key aspects of the javelin throw, which we thought, or which they thought was key to the successful javelin throw, and kind of having to assess their knowledge. We would observe that by going around and listening to pair discussions and group discussions to see if there's similarities across the board. From here, then each group was then able to demonstrate the javelin throw by what they had written down or what they had found the key aspects of the javelin throw to be from the video, allowing them to kind of have like a trial and error and an attempt at the javelin throw with implemented equipment to kind of suss and for us to assess where their knowledge is currently with the javelin throw. Then that would be followed by some questioning, just for them to be quite reflective with a few safety considerations. Obviously they're throwing implemented equipment, but we would instruct them on kind of the safety measures that are needed when throwing a javelin, of how to pick it up and how to collect. So on to the main chunk of the lesson that I'll now pass over to Todd.
So one of the things from the brief was about a student-centered approach. So we've gone for a guided discovery approach. Another thing on the brief was to make sure that there were high levels of activity. So obviously in a typical or a traditional javelin lesson, it'd be throw, stop, wait, go and collect it, bring it back. And obviously that can be quite time consuming, and you don't get much activity in the sense of the physical aspect of the lesson. So what we decided to do was split the pupils into 3 different groups based on their ability to, demonstrate the learning objectives. So pupils who couldn't name the at least 2 technical points, they were going to go in zone A, which is the smallest zone. Those who could state the 2 key technical points, or at least 2 key technical points, would go in zone B, which is slightly bigger. And those in zone C would probably be our gifted and talented pupils, or any pupils who could state 2 technical points and explain the importance of this. So this is linked back to our learning objectives, and then using this to differentiate the groupings. Now, even though the aim is not to see how far they can throw it necessarily, because we've used different implements, or because we would use different implements in this guided discovery approach, it doesn't necessarily mean that pupils are limited by that. So for example, the one child who is autistic, he may still be able to throw a ball with a javelin technique. So the idea is that the students would then be given cards which give different conditions. So for example, throwing sitting down, throwing from a tall kneeling position, throwing left foot forward, right foot forward, side on, etc. And the idea is that the students experiment with these different conditions. They have to do all of them. They have to use at least one implement, and we'd still be looking to set high expectations. So for example, you might have a student who uses the ball not because they need to, but because it goes the furthest. But then we bring it back to the learning objectives and say, look, we're actually looking for your javelin technique here, not who can throw the furthest. And as I said, because there are different implements, it's not necessarily excluding those who would perhaps struggle if we were actually throwing a proper javelin. Also, by having them in pairs and in different zones, which are then separated from each other, there's less chance of crossfire from a safety perspective. The students get more chances to throw the implement because we don't have to be quite as cautious as we would be with proper javelin. That then transition into our next game, which is battleships. So in this game, we're asking pupils within the zones to pair up or to get into groups of 5. they're staying in their zones, and for example, the lower ability pupils who are in zone A, which is smaller, would be using targets, big targets such as hula hoops, creating their battleship. And obviously, because it's because there would be, say, 4 hula hoops, even if you miss one, you still might hit the other 2 or 3. Students in zones zones B and C would have smaller targets to hit, so you're still stretching those gifted and talented pupils. Plus, they've got they're working within a bigger zone, so not only do they have to throw it further, but they have to be more accurate. So the differentiation here for the higher ability students is that we could use smaller hoops. The differentiation for the lower ability students is that they can throw implements which are somewhat easier, such as a vortex or American football. And if that's still difficult, they can still take on a coaching role and achieve that goal objective of evaluating their partner's Javelin technique by using the iPads, referring back to the resources that we've provided them with. Finally, if we did have enough time, then we could further enhance the battleships game by using, rather than having the targets set out in a line, then they could simply be separated more randomly to challenge students to hit harder targets, because there's less bandwidth for them to miss, as it were. Now I'll hand over to Joe, who's going to talk about our 4 in a row game and the plenary to finish off.
Yeah, so in our last game for our session, we've gone for a 4 in a row style competition type of game. So there'll be 2 teams, 1 grid, where alternatively one member of the team will come up, throw, place a cone in terms of where the actual vortex or javelin landed, and then continue to repeat that pattern until all members in the team have gone. As you can see throughout our session, we have focused on technique just through fun sort of games. So what we're hoping to have is some element of competition, throughout the whole games, and then we're able to sort of rotate between teams should time permit us to do so. In terms of a safety aspect, we have given the option to students to be able to use 2 different types of resources, whether it be an actual javelin or a vortex or a tennis ball. And we've also sort of distanced all groups, just making sure that obviously nobody is in sort of any area of where any sort of health and safety sort of aspects could take place. Once we've finished the stat, we've then moved on to our plenary, where we are sort of asking the students to self-assess how they think they've done. So obviously, as you can see on our session plan, we operate on the bronze, silver, gold sort of hierarchy, and we've asked the questions to students: why do you think you're silver? And get them to rationalize, because more often when you question a student, they will think they're at some sort of level, but once you finish questioning them, they're usually higher. So that's the methods and sort of approach we've gone for. Are there any questions?
Oh, that was a really neat lesson plan, really detailed. Really like, you know, the use of videos and the use of resource cards. I think for a Javelin lesson, you know, traditionally you wouldn't squeeze much activity levels, but what you did is that you adapted the practices by using the adapted equipment, the vortex and the foam javelins, and that gets them a lot more engaged and really boost the activity levels up. So really, really well done on that. Just one question: you obviously mentioned how you'd adapt the practice for the person with autistic spectrum. What if they can't do it physically? Is there any task they could do instead?
So one of the things we should have mentioned. So James, if you just scroll down on the lesson plan. So obviously we plan to have iPads in an ideal world. However, if we didn't have iPads, then we'd have a resource which would highlight the key points in the javelin throw. Now, we might use a more simple resource than this. We might have even taken pictures of a teacher throwing the javelin and showing some key errors. We could differentiate that further by explain what these errors are and whether the pupil could spot other pupils who might have been performing these errors, and then to evaluate what what this pupil thinks that their peers might need to do in order to correct any errors they were seeing, and then to be able to evaluate whether their coaching intervention was successful. So if they couldn't throw any of the other pieces of equipment, so tennis ball, foam javelin, vortex, etc., then they could still achieve that goal objective of being able to evaluate their partner's feedback and evaluating their partner's throw and providing feedback on it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, nice. Jacob, any?
No, that was it.
Do we still have time?
We've got 4 minutes if you need to ask a question.
Yeah, so just thinking about it, maybe your lessons got quite a lot of tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you'll be able to deliver all the different stages of the different tasks of the lesson? And if you didn't, how would you adapt the session so that you'd still achieve your learning objectives?
Yeah, I know what you mean. When we designed it as well, I mean, it is a lot. There is a lot of equipment involved, and there could be a lot of setup time. So obviously, it would be managing your time maybe prior to the lesson. If the possibility of it, if it was after lunch or after break, being able to set it up within that time. But yeah, I know what you mean with the situation. But as you can see, where like we've set out the groups A, B, and C with the red X's. Essentially, if they were set up across the field, the actual equipment that would only really be changing would be within the actual, like the targets for say, and then obviously it would vary slightly going on to the 4 in a row. Oh, sorry, my screen share's just gone. But yeah, I think with time it kind of plays with a matter. If we were running out of time, you'd probably manipulate the practice and potentially stick to one game, so stick more to just battleships. And maybe not actually use the 4 in a row in the end. It kind of depends on how fast the kids are getting the actual technique of the throw and how much they're gaining from the practice as well. Like if you feel like the students are becoming less engaged within the battleships and you think you need to change it up, you may actually have to go on to the 4 in a row before you maybe have thought. So it could be really down to the day and the individual characteristics.
And equally on the subject of logistics, the diagram where the targets are more scattered, that was meant as a sort of either a progression if pupils are really accurate. For example, let's say that for a pupil in zone A, it's actually quite easy to throw, say, even a beanbag into a hoop. Then it's very easy just to move the hoops, and in 5 seconds you've changed the game completely. So if needs be, we could almost cut the 4 in a row out just because it's easier to transition between battleships and the random target practice more so than it is to then set up the 4 in a row. So yeah, that'd be another way around it. And also making sure that we're doing our AFL as if we needed to go and visit a group at a time rather than necessarily stopping the whole lesson to then speak to kids.
Yeah.
Cool. We're gonna leave it there.
I'm happy with that.
Cool.
Yeah. Nice.
Right, I'm going to stop my recording there and I'll restart it when you boys get going just to back your one up.
Do you want to stop the call recording if you're sure?